In the cold expanse of deep space, where the stars flickered like distant memories, the human colony on Oscara thrived, its people working hard to carve out a future in a new world with lush jungles and endless oceans. Their lives seemed to unfold like a dream. Oscara had become a beacon of hope for humanity's expansion into the cosmos, an oasis of peace, a testament to their resolve after years of war and hardship on Earth. Yet all of it was torn away in an instant. It began without warning, no alarms, no signals, just silence. A darkness fell across Oscara's orbit, like a veil shutting out the sun. The first to go were the communication relays. One by one, they blinked out. No transmissions to Earth, no distress calls to anyone. The colony's outer defenses were breached in less than an hour, as though something had known exactly where to strike. On the surface, the people of Oscara carried on with their daily routines, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf them. A new shipment of supplies had just arrived from Earth, and the workers were busy unloading crates and checking inventories when the sky split open above them. The first wave of alien ships appeared like shadows in the sky, massive and cold as steel, their sleek and horrifying forms descending in perfect unison. It wasn't until the first blast hit the central energy tower that the nightmare began. Explosions rocked the planet, sending shockwaves through the city's buildings crumbled into ruins as fire rained down from the skies. The sound of destruction was deafening, a symphony of devastation that drowned out all hope. It was only a matter of moments before the colony's defense grid failed completely. There was no chance to regroup, no time to evacuate. The people of Oscara could only watch as their world came to an end. The alien forces descended without mercy, their weapons unlike anything humanity had ever seen. A strange and terrible energy tore through Oscara's surface, stripping it bare in a matter of hours. Entire cities were reduced to ash, the population wiped out with cold precision. The invaders showed no sign of slowing, no reason behind their attack, other than the simple fact that they could, and then just as quickly as they had come, they vanished. The darkened sky, where their ships had once hovered, now empty, and still a haunting silence followed the destruction. It took hours for the first reports to reach Earth, and even then they were fragmented at best. Communications were chaotic, a broken cry for help barely reaching the central command before it too fell silent. The images transmitted were too horrific to comprehend as the last of the colony's automated systems sent out a final desperate signal. But the message was clear: the colony was lost. Oscara was no more. Back on Earth, the response was immediate, but not in the way anyone expected. The news hit like a thunderclap across the globe. Governments froze in place. People stared at their screens in disbelief. No one could grasp the full scope of what had just happened. The news anchors struggled to find words, but the one thing that echoed across every broadcast was the same question: how could this happen to them? And then, as the horror began to sink in, the world reacted with a fury so deep it rattled the very foundation of human nature. Grief turned into rage, and rage into a resolve stronger than any military force Earth had ever seen. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath, waiting for anything to happen next. The United Earth government convened in an emergency session. As soon as the first official reports arrived, it wasn't long before every corner of the planet was alive with the same sense of urgency and fear. Representatives from every nation gathered in the vast chambers beneath Earth's towering cities, their faces etched with disbelief. The usual protocols had been thrown aside as panic took hold, and the need for answers became overwhelming. They needed to understand who had done this, and why. They needed to know how to strike back. The hall buzzed with voices as leaders shouted over one another. Accusations flew. Some demanded to seek peace diplomacy. They suggested a probe, a negotiation to find the truth behind the attack. But others disagreed strongly. It wasn't long before the first voice of reason rang out from the back of the room. General Aurelia Shaw stood tall with her piercing eyes locked onto the council, her uniform bearing the scars of countless battles she had fought in the past. Earth's military commander knew better than anyone what this was. She didn't need to ask who had done it. She knew it was an invasion, and it was only the beginning. Enough! Shaw's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. We don't have time for diplomacy. We don't have time for questions. We need to act now, or every colony, every city we've ever built will fall just like Oscara. A murmur ran through the room as she stepped forward, her words like fire stoking the coals of the council's growing fury. The X-Tar didn't come to negotiate, they came to conquer, and if we sit here debating this, we will be the next target. Her voice was steady but firm. I've seen their kind before, ruthless and efficient in the way they wage war, and we have no choice but to meet them with the same ferocity. Shaw's words resonated through the room, and slowly, one by one, the council members began to nod in agreement, the fear in their hearts, tempered by a growing resolve. Earth could not afford to be passive. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Then it settled, the council president said with a resigned tone. We deploy Earth's entire fleet, and we hit them where it hurts. The decision was made. The words of the council echoed across the globe, and within hours the world's militaries went into full mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was activated with a single goal in mind: revenge and survival. Earth's massive fleet, which had been in a state of semi-readiness since the last wars, began to come alive with unprecedented speed and efficiency. The factories began to hum as new ships were constructed with technologies years ahead of what the X-Tar had encountered. Captain Alex Quinn found himself thrust into the heart of this storm. His ship, the Eagle's Wrath, was one of the most advanced warships humanity had ever built, and now it was his responsibility to lead it into the unknown. Quinn was no stranger to combat, but nothing could have prepared him for the scale of what was coming ahead. As his crew assembled on the bridge, their faces grim but determined, Quinn gave the order to launch. It was not just the start of a mission, it was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, one where Earth would not be a victim, but a force to be reckoned with. Across the world, every military leader, every strategist and soldier understood the weight of what was happening. There was no going back. The 700,000 ships of the United Earth Fleet were set to leave the cradle of humanity and chart a course for the heart of the X-Tar Empire, a journey that would either end in their complete annihilation or a victory that would echo through the stars forever. The countdown to war had begun. As Earth's fleet began its swift departure from orbit, there was an undeniable sense of finality in the air. Every ship, every soldier, every pilot knew that the path they were on led to a confrontation unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The enormity of their task hung over them like a weight, but the fires of determination were brighter than ever. Their mission was clear: revenge for the loss of Oscara, but more importantly, survival for the future of Earth and its colonies. Captain Alex Quinn stood at the helm of the Eagle's Wrath, staring out into the expanse of space as the vast fleet moved in formation behind him. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, sleek and powerful, a symbol of all that Earth had accomplished in a short span of time. But Quinn knew that technology alone wouldn't win this war. They needed to be faster, smarter, and more ruthless than their enemies. And as the warp engines fired, hurling them through the fabric of space, he could only hope that the courage of humanity would be enough to see them through. The next few days were a blur of preparations, briefings, and constant updates from Earth Command. As they approached the outer reaches of X-Tar space, the sense of urgency grew sharper every hour. The fleet was a mix of old and new ships, some equipped with cutting-edge weapons and shielding, while others were more familiar but still formidable. Quinn's ship, though new, was a beacon of what humanity could achieve when pushed to its limits. But there was no denying that they were facing an enemy who had the advantage in terms of numbers and experience in this new theater of war. As they neared the edge of the X-Tar's claimed space, the tension aboard the Eagle's Wrath was palpable. Crew members moved with military precision, and Quinn was no different. He paced the command deck, his mind constantly calculating the best course of action. The attack would come soon, but where would the first strike land? The X-Tar were cunning. They would no doubt have hidden defenses, or even entire fleets lying in wait somewhere in the darkness. Captain, the voice of his first officer, Commander Lena Morris, broke through his thoughts. We've reached the outer rim of their territory. No sign of hostile ships yet. Her face was sharp, but her tone betrayed the concern that lay beneath the surface. She had fought in wars before, but this was different. This was personal for all of them. Hold position for now, Quinn replied, his voice steady, but he felt the same anxiety gnawing at him. I don't trust it. We're too close to their homeworld for there to be no sign of them. His eyes flicked to the tactical display. scanning the empty expanse for any sign of movement. The silence was oppressive. It didn't take long for his instincts to be proven right. Just as they reached the point where the X-Tar's strategic defenses should have been, the fleet picked up a massive energy surge from a nearby asteroid field. Too late to avoid it. A large wave of X-Tar ships materialized from the shadows of the field, as if they had been waiting for them all along. The X-Tar had expected them. Quinn felt the first rush of adrenaline, the sharp realization that they were already in the thick of battle. The enemy was here. "Shields up," Quinn barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All weapons ready, prepare to engage." Across the fleet, the same order rang out. Earth's ships bristled with weapons, ready for the deadly dance of war. The first wave of X-Tar ships was fast and efficient, darting through space with terrifying precision. Quinn's tactical mind went into overdrive as the enemy ships flanked them on all sides. These were no ordinary invaders. They had trained for this, anticipated humanity's move. But humanity had something the X-Tar didn't: determination. The Eagle's Wrath fired its first volley, the blinding light of lasers and plasma beams lighting up the dark void of space. The X-Tar responded with their own devastating fire, their ships unleashing a torrent of destruction. The battle was on. Quinn knew they had to act fast or risk being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. The war for survival had begun. The battle erupted like a storm that had been building for centuries, its fury unrelenting and all-encompassing. Captain Alex Quinn's fingers flew across the control panel as the Eagle's Wrath rocked with enemy fire. The ship's shields flared brightly as they absorbed the initial onslaught. But the force of the X-Tar's weapons was unlike anything Earth had faced. Quinn's heart raced as the first wave of X-Tar ships surged forward, massive hulking vessels bristling with weaponry, firing in perfect formation. "All systems holding steady, Captain." Commander Lena Morris's voice rang out through the chaos. Her eyes were glued to the tactical display, but there was no hiding the tension in her face. "But we need more firepower if we're going to break through their lines." Quinn didn't need to hear the words to know what she meant. They were outnumbered, and despite Earth's technological superiority, the X-Tar were a formidable force, cruel, methodical, and relentless. The Eagle's Wrath dodged the first blast, veering sharply to the right as a barrage of plasma missiles streaked past them. The alien ships were faster than anticipated, their advanced propulsion systems allowing them to shift positions with deadly precision. "Focus on the lead ship," Quinn ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Take it out first. Then we'll work our way down." "Target locked," Lena responded, her fingers tapping swiftly on the control interface. The Eagle's Wrath shuddered as it fired a massive plasma shot, the energy beam shooting out toward the nearest X-Tar ship. The impact was devastating. The lead ship, a giant vessel with towering spires and dark plating, shuddered under the blast, its shields flickering. Quinn allowed himself a fleeting moment of satisfaction before the X-Tar retaliated. "Incoming." Multiple shots. The ship's navigator yelled. Quinn had no time to process the words before the entire ship shuddered as a series of explosions rocked the hull. The bridge lights flickered as emergency alarms blared, but Quinn didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. "All hands brace for impact," he shouted. His voice was the anchor in the storm. "Damage report," Lena demanded, her eyes scanning the readouts. "We've taken a hit to the starboard side, Captain. Shields at 75%, hull integrity at 88%. The tactical officer reported, grimacing as another explosion rocked the ship. "Get those shields back up. We need to keep fighting," Quinn barked, his grip tightening on the controls. He couldn't afford to lose ground. Not now. Not when the battle had barely begun. The Eagle's Wrath continued to fire, its guns unleashing a torrent of destruction as the human fleet followed suit, engaging the X-Tar in brutal combat. The two forces collided in the void of space, their weapons lighting up the darkness like a deadly fireworks display. Earth's ships moved with purpose and precision, their tactics honed through years of preparation, while the X-Tar reacted with chilling efficiency, countering every move the humans made. In the chaos, Quinn's mind raced, his focus narrowing. Each ship he saw through the tactical displays was a potential threat. The X-Tar were relentless, using every advantage they had: speed, firepower, and numbers. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for dominance. Quinn's hand clenched around the command seat as the tension in his chest built. But he couldn't afford to show weakness now. "All ships, focus fire on their command vessel," Quinn commanded. "If we take out their leadership, we can break their formation." Across the fleet, the orders were echoed. Human ships began to coordinate, focusing their fire on the massive central command ship of the X-Tar fleet. But the alien vessel was heavily protected, its shields holding strong against Earth's initial barrage. The fight was becoming a battle of attrition, one side refusing to yield, the other pushing back with every ounce of their will. Quinn gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to lose this fight. Not for Oscara, not for Earth. The stakes had never been higher, and the war was only just beginning. As the battle raged across the dark void of space, it became clear to Captain Alex Quinn and the crew of the Eagle's Wrath that their initial tactics, however well executed, were not enough to turn the tide against the X-Tar. The alien fleet had proven to be far more advanced than they had anticipated. Their ships moved with an eerie synchronization, each one anticipating human maneuvers before they were even executed. The relentless waves of fire seemed endless, and with every strike, Earth's ships were losing precious ground. Quinn paced the bridge, his mind running through every available option. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but he refused to believe they were doomed. Earth had more than just technology on their side. They had the will to fight, the drive to survive. But even he knew that would only carry them so far. "Captain," Commander Lena Morris interrupted his thoughts, her voice tinged with an urgency that made him turn. "We've received a transmission from Earth Command. They've activated the Genesis device." Quinn froze. The Genesis device, the project that had been shrouded in secrecy for years. It had been conceived as a last resort weapon, a doomsday device with the potential to shift the balance of power in an instant. He had heard the rumors, of course, whispers in military circles of a weapon that could alter the course of the war, but no one had ever truly believed it would be deployed. "Are you sure?" Quinn's voice was low, his mind racing with the implications. Lena nodded, her gaze focused on the communication console. "They're preparing to launch it, Captain. They're counting on it to break the X-Tar's stranglehold on the fleet." Quinn's heart raced. The Genesis device was capable of devastating power. It harnessed the energy of a collapsing star and focused it into a single concentrated beam. If it worked, it could obliterate entire fleets in an instant. But Quinn knew there was a risk. A weapon of such magnitude could be unstable, unpredictable. They had never tested it in live combat conditions, and no one knew for sure how it would perform. "How long until it's ready for deployment?" Quinn asked, his voice strained. Lena glanced at her screen, her brow furrowing as she processed the data. "It's already charged. Earth Command is ready to launch it as soon as we give the order. But Captain, once it's fired, there's no going back. The energy surge could tear through the fabric of space itself, destabilize this entire region." Quinn's mind raced through the possibilities. The Genesis device might be the only thing capable of ending the battle, but it could also endanger everything they had fought for. A single misfire, and they could lose not just the war, but the entire sector of space. But then he thought of Oscara, the millions of lives lost, the devastation they had all witnessed, and the decision was made. "Do it," Quinn ordered, his voice resolute. "Fire the Genesis device. We'll take the risk." Lena hesitated for a split second, then issued the command. Across the fleet, Earth's warships prepared to fire. The Eagle's Wrath trembled as the signal was sent, and in the distance, Quinn could see the immense wave of energy gathering. It was a sight that filled him with both awe and dread, a swirling vortex of light, growing ever stronger, an unholy force building beyond imagination. The beam was unleashed with a roar, a flash of pure, searing brilliance. It cut through the darkness of space, carving a path of destruction as it slammed into the heart of the X-Tar fleet. The first alien ship it struck was obliterated in an instant, the very atoms of its hull vaporized by the intensity of the blast. The energy surged onward, tearing through the alien ranks like a divine wrath, annihilating everything in its path. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had stopped, the entire universe frozen in the wake of the Genesis device. And then, the devastation came. Entire X-Tar ships disappeared in a blinding flash, their once pristine hulls turned to dust. The wave of energy cascaded through the enemy fleet, their lines buckling under the sheer force. But then, as the last remnants of the Genesis device's power faded into the distance, Quinn's heart sank. The rift it had opened in space had not closed as they had hoped. Instead, it lingered, an unstable tear in the very fabric of reality itself. Something was wrong. Something was still out there. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The Genesis device had done its work, ripping through the X-Tar fleet with a terrifying efficiency that left nothing in its wake but the void of space. The alien ships, massive, formidable, were reduced to nothing more than shattered debris. Quinn stood motionless on the bridge of the Eagle's Wrath, staring at the glowing aftereffects of the weapon's incredible power. Victory, it seemed, was within their grasp. But then something happened. The rift created by the Genesis device, meant to collapse in on itself after the blast, did not close. Instead, it expanded. The fabric of space around it began to warp, twisting, and stretching in ways that were both unnatural and deeply unsettling. Quinn's breath caught in his throat as he watched the swirling energy continue to grow, sending shockwaves through the surrounding stars. It was a fissure in reality, an unstable tear that threatened to consume everything in its path. "Captain," Lena's voice broke through the fog of disbelief. "That rift, it's getting bigger. We've got readings showing something. Some kind of ship moving through it." Before Quinn could respond, the rift surged again, a violent pulse of energy that expanded rapidly across the battlefield. The destruction had barely stopped when the first of the new ships emerged from the tier, vast, impossibly large, and unlike anything Quinn had ever seen. These were no X-Tar vessels, their sleek dark forms unlike the alien ships they had fought so far. These ships were grotesque, monstrous, with jagged edges that seemed to defy the laws of physics itself. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through the ship's hull, as if the very universe was trembling. "Multiple readings. More ships are coming through," shouted the ship's navigator. Panic was evident in his voice as the new fleet continued to emerge from the rift. Hundreds, then thousands, each one larger and more imposing than the last. The X-Tar, it seemed, were not the only invaders. Quinn's stomach turned as the implications hit him like a blow to the chest. The Genesis device, the weapon they had used to turn the tide of battle, had inadvertently opened the door to something far worse. These ships, they were different. They were older, and their presence filled the crew with a primal sense of dread. No human ship had ever come across anything like this. The technology, the scale, it was beyond anything in the database. They weren't just fighting a war for survival anymore. They were staring down the barrel of an entirely new, unknown enemy. Reverting to evasive maneuvers, Quinn barked, snapping into command. "Get us out of here now." The Eagle's Wrath shot forward, weaving through the wreckage of the old X-Tar fleet as the new ships began to advance, their weapons coming online with terrifying precision. Quinn's mind raced with calculations. There was no way to fight these ships with their current resources. The Genesis device had done its job, but it had also unlocked something far more deadly than they could have imagined. "Captain, we're outmatched," Lena said quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Those ships, They're not X-Tar. They're something else, something older. Where are they coming from? Quinn's voice was tight, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Is the rift? Is it stable? I don't know, Lena replied. It's fluctuating. The readings don't make sense. It could destabilize further, pulling in more ships, maybe even more rifts. The Eagle's wrath shook violently as a volley of fire ripped through its shields, throwing crew members to the floor. The ship's systems were beginning to fail under the pressure. The invaders, with their overwhelming firepower, weren't just pushing the humans back, they were annihilating them. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Quinn yelled again, his mind racing. Activate emergency protocols. We need to hold on long enough to regroup. We're not leaving until we figure out what's going on. The rift pulsed once more, the energy expanding outward in violent arcs, and Quinn realized with a sickening clarity that this wasn't just a battle, it was a test. The Genesis device had opened the door to something far beyond their understanding. And now, Earth was facing the consequences. The battle had just become far more dangerous than any of them could have ever imagined. Quinn's mind raced as the Eagle's wrath veered sharply to avoid another incoming barrage from the alien ships. The unfamiliar vessels swarmed in from the rift, moving with an eerie, unnatural coordination. There was no room for retreat now. Their only choice was to survive long enough to understand what was happening. The magnitude of their situation was overwhelming, but Quinn's resolve hardened. This battle was no longer just about revenge for Oscara. It was about ensuring humanity's survival against an entirely new threat, one that had crossed into their universe from the rift they had unintentionally opened. Status report. Quinn snapped, watching the system's display flicker with warnings. Shields at 45%, Captain. The tactical officer called out. Hull damage on the starboard side. Multiple breaches. We can't take much more of this. Return fire. Quinn ordered without hesitation, his pulse quickening. Every available weapon. Use everything we've got. The crew scrambled into action, but the power of the enemy ships was staggering. The new invaders' weapons seemed to disintegrate entire sections of their ships with each blast, reducing human warships to floating debris. For every strike the humans delivered, the invaders retaliated with a force that pushed them back further and further. The situation was becoming dire, and Quinn could feel the walls closing in. Captain, we've got another problem. Lena's voice cracked over the comms. She was on the lower deck, coordinating with other ships in the fleet. The rift, it's still expanding. I'm seeing more energy fluctuations. The longer we stay here, the more we risk being overwhelmed. Quinn cursed under his breath. It was a choice no captain should have to make, but time was running out. If they didn't break free from the battle soon, they would be lost, not just to the invaders, but to the rift itself. The tearing energy was threatening to destabilize their region of space, threatening to pull everything into it, including the remnants of the X-Tar and human fleets. Evacuate all ships within range. Get them to the safe zone. Quinn ordered, his voice low but determined. And get me a direct line to Earth Command. I need a solution. Now. Lena nodded, but her expression was grim. She knew, just as Quinn did, that Earth Command was struggling as much as they were. They'd been caught completely off guard by this new enemy, and despite the full might of the United Earth Fleet, it seemed they were nowhere near prepared to face what lay beyond the rift. It was as if they were fighting an entirely different war, one with rules that didn't apply to them. In the midst of the chaos, Quinn's thoughts kept circling back to the rift itself. It was the key to everything. It was how the enemy had arrived, how they had emerged from nothing, and it was how they were planning to destroy humanity. He had seen the cracks in reality as the rift pulsed with unnatural energy. There had to be something. Some way to reverse it or close it before they were consumed. Captain, Lena's voice broke through again, this time with urgency. We've intercepted a transmission from one of the enemy ships. It's fragmented, but it seems to be a warning of some kind. A warning? Quinn asked, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "It's in a language we don't fully understand," Lena replied. "But from what we can make out, it sounds like they're not the only ones. These ships, this rift, they're just the first wave of something much bigger, something more destructive. And if we don't stop the rift, more will come." The weight of her words hit Quinn like a freight train. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were facing the opening stages of an invasion on an unprecedented scale. Whatever was coming through that rift was not limited to these few ships. They had just unwittingly opened the door to an entire galaxy of unknown enemies, each more powerful than the last. Quinn clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. There was no more time for hesitation. "Lena," he said, his voice a whisper of steel, "I don't care what it takes. We're going to close that rift. We fight our way to the heart of it, and we find a way to stop it. Earth's future depends on it." The crew on the bridge stiffened. The battle outside continued to rage, but there was now a new purpose in the air. It was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a desperate race to the heart of the rift, where the true answer to humanity's future lay. The path ahead would be treacherous, and they were walking into the unknown. But Quinn had never been one to back down from a fight, not when humanity's survival was on the line. The Eagle's Wrath was a battered husk of its former self. Sparks flew from the control panels as the emergency lights flickered on and off. Quinn stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the swirling rift that dominated the space ahead of them. Behind him, the remnants of the United Earth Fleet were fighting a desperate battle to buy time. The X-Tar forces were retreating, their ships scattered in the wake of the Genesis device, but the true threat had yet to be fully realized. The rift was still growing, and with each passing moment, more of the alien vessels poured through. It was as if the fabric of space itself was being torn apart, and Quinn knew that humanity had no choice but to act now or face extinction. "All ships report in," Quinn barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "What's our status?" "Captain," Lena said, her tone filled with quiet urgency. "We've lost contact with over half of the fleet. The remaining ships are attempting to retreat, but the rift's expansion is accelerating. It's going to pull in everything if we don't stop it now." Quinn's jaw tightened. There was no room for retreat. They couldn't afford to lose the remaining ships, but the true battle lay ahead. If they didn't act now, the rift would swallow everything, every colony, every world, and the human race with it. "Prepare for a direct assault on the rift," Quinn ordered. "All remaining power to the main engines. We're going in." The crew moved with a sense of grim determination. The Eagle's Wrath shuddered as its damaged systems sputtered to life, pushing the ship forward into the heart of the rift's maelstrom. The rift was no longer just a tear in space. It had become a swirling vortex of energy and matter, a chaotic blend of reality and destruction. The alien ships, though formidable, were scattered now, more concerned with escaping the unstable rift than with further engaging the humans. Quinn didn't care. He couldn't afford to let their escape become his focus. The only thing that mattered now was reaching the rift's core, the source of the instability. The rift's epicenter was their only chance, and Quinn knew that it would not be easy. If the Genesis device had opened this door, then only something of equal or greater power could close it. "Captain," Lena said, her eyes wide with realization, "there's no guarantee the rift can be closed, not by any device we have on board. If we go any closer, we may trigger a chain reaction that could rip the entire sector apart." Quinn turned to face her, his face grim but resolute. "Then we'll make sure we go out fighting. It's all we can do now." As they closed in on the rift's core, the Eagle's Wrath felt as though it was being pulled in, the gravitational forces at its center threatening to tear the ship apart. Quinn could feel the stress on the hull, the vibrations threatening to shake them loose. But they pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the rift before it consumed them entirely. "Targeting the rift's core," the weapons officer said, voice steady despite the chaos. "We have one shot at this. We're ready when you are, Captain." Quinn nodded. It all came down to this. He glanced once more at the faces of his crew. all of them willing to die for the cause, for the future of Earth. They had come so far, fought so hard, and now they would face the greatest challenge humanity had ever known. "Fire," Quinn commanded. The ship's weapons unleashed a final, earth-shattering volley. A surge of energy, more powerful than anything they had fired before, tore into the heart of the rift. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The rift seemed to pulse, as though in response to the attack, and Quinn held his breath. And then, the universe itself seemed to shudder. The rift began to collapse, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed. It folded in on itself, its chaotic energy retreating into nothingness. The alien ships still in the vicinity scattered as the rift's pull weakened, their form and structure evaporating as the tear in space sealed itself. As the rift collapsed, Quinn's heart pounded in his chest. The Eagle's wrath rocked violently as the last remnants of the energy surged outward, but it held together. The enemy ships were gone, vanishing into the void. The rift was closed. Silence enveloped the battlefield. For a long moment, Quinn stood there, breathless, his gaze fixed on the now empty space. Earth had won, against all odds, but at a terrible cost. The fleet was decimated, their numbers reduced to mere fragments of what they had once been. They had fought to the brink, but they had survived. And for now, that was enough. Quinn turned to Lena, a small, weary smile crossing his face. "We did it." Lena nodded, her expression softening, but there was something deeper in her eyes, a lingering sadness. "We did, but this isn't over, Captain. It's just the beginning." Quinn looked out into the vast, empty expanse of space, knowing she was right. This battle had been won, but the war for humanity's future was far from finished.